must unite what has been set asunder.
We are TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and wow, it's been a while. Sorry, I haven't done any shows, it seems like in about a month now. I've either been traveling or really sick. I was actually out in Arizona location scouting for the TV series Seed that I've been developing, and toward the end of my trip, I look up and the sky is just really crisscross grid of chemtrails. And what do you know? Next day, I've got what I'm going to say is chemtrail flu. And I was down for the count for several days and actually still have a really annoying cough. So excuse me if it comes out during this broadcast. But, well, we're back and actually had a show that was pre-recorded. It was supposed to air on December 27th, and something went wrong with it. The first 42 minutes or so got messed up, and so it didn't happen. So we are actually doing a take two this evening, and we're doing it live. My guest is Zen Garcia. Zen, are you there, sir?
I am, brother. Honored to be here with you again.
Hey, man, thanks for coming back for round two. I don't know what happened to the last one, but we'll see if we can get through this one.
Yeah, sure we'll make it.
Yeah, so going back to November, missed you at the Flat Earth International Conference, but I kind of felt like you were there because my little 6-foot table was across from the Zen Garcia Mall.
Right.
I kind of felt like you were there, at least in spirit.
Yeah, well represented. Had some good people there on my behalf.
Yeah, for sure. You had a great representation of. How many books do you have out now, anyway?
Personally, I have 14 that I wrote myself, but I've done a trilogy called The Great Commission recently, and I just released 2 on the Testament of the Patriarchs and the Prophets about the ancient prophecies of Christ. But we've released several others, probably like 50 through Sacred Word Publishing.
Wow. Now, you're also publishing works for other people now these days, too, right?
Right, that, and we're also publishing extra biblical texts, which a lot of people have not heard about, and I'm compiling them into different collections. Like I released one on Yeshua and the infancy gospels, the early childhood and lost years, and like I said, the Great Commission is a 3-book set, and it's on like there's one book of Acts in the canonical books, but there are literally dozens of manuscripts which describe the different acts of Peter, the acts of Paul, the acts of Matthias, the acts of Addai, Thaddeus, all these different apostles that went out 2 by 2, and the different things that they encountered as they went to different lands. The acts of Thomas when he was sent out to India. So all of these different acts represent the Great Commission as they were instructed to go forth to preach the gospel to all the world. And most of the apostolic material is not known about as far as what particular things they had to overcome, and the way that the stories interweave with one another as well. And also there are many women represented in the early church and the establishment of it, and so I share all of this material. And the 3rd book of the Great Commission is all the apocalyptic texts, which are particular to our being the last generation, even Enoch writing to us about this remote and distant generation, the fig tree generation, which I believe we are. But anyways, all of that is compiled, and it's all about the end of days, the last times, and those are all amazing texts as well.
Yeah, that's exciting. It was, I don't know, a week or two, maybe 3 weeks at the most after the conference. I received a series of packages in the mail that had a whole bunch of your books in them, and some of the books published that were public domain that look really, really interesting. The historical treatise of the travels of Noah into Europe.
That's a fascinating text.
Yeah, I mean, really, all of these just look great. Where can people check out this collection of books if they were interested in looking at what you have to offer?
sacredwordpublishing.net, www.sacredwordpublishing.net, and you can find all of our materials there.
Okay, right on. And you also have a show here on TFR, Secrets Revealed, Thursday evenings from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm sure you talk about a lot of this stuff on that show.
Yes, I do. I cover a lot of the material, and I do read from different texts, and in order to bring them forth, but also in the way that I compile a lot of the material to bring forth a different topic or cover a specific issue. So,
yeah. So there's probably a good opportunity for people if they want to go ahead and check out your channel there and look at the shows that you've done on the various subjects, some of which we will cover this evening. One book in particular caught my attention. All of them I find really interesting, but one of them is called Paradise, Sides of the North and the Mount of the Congregation. That's the one we're going to be talking about this evening. And I want to say you sent me that package pretty close about the time I saw an article about a map that was discovered by somebody named Urbano Monti, if I'm pronouncing that right, in the year 1587. I believe he was a contemporary of Mercator. And, well, it's a circular azimuthal style map, North Pole polar projection kind of thing. And it's loaded with all kinds of mythological imagery and things. But one of the things that it has that you find among many ancient maps is this island-like structure in the north. It's divided into like 4 parts with like a mountain in the middle. Mount Meru, I believe is called. And so, I see this map. I put out a video on it on, I think it was December 19th. And, well, you've got a whole book dealing with this mountain in the middle. So I'm excited to jump right into it. I mean, a lot of people, when we talk about flat Earth, we're kind of focused on Antarctica. Yeah, what's going on in the south? But you found there's a whole lot to be interested in the north. So tell us about that journey. How did you kind of shift your attention from the south to the north and get into this research?
I was trying to figure out the passages with regard to Isaiah 14 and the whole quotation there where it talks about the Mount of the Congregation and the sides of the north, and wanting to know what all of that meant, and understanding that it was cryptic for, because both of us have been looking at and examining the cosmology and coming to understanding that certainly the earth and the firmament and the stars and the luminaries and everything that we've been traditionally taught with regard to the Earth being one of 9 planets spinning in circle once daily as it annually orbits around the sun, that all of that we are having to reconsider. And so in studying the specifics of cosmology and reviewing many of these extra biblical manuscripts, now that we have this understanding, rereading and restudying a lot of this material, it comes together in new light. And so that's what I've been writing about with this Flat Earth trilogy. The first one, the Flat Earth as key to decrypt the Book of Enoch, and how understanding that the cosmology was geocentric and that the Earth was a flat circular plane, and that were covered over by the solid structure of the firmament. Then I reviewed all of that material. That led me to my second book on that, The Firmament But the third one, in studying the specifics of the dynamics of the cosmology and the structure as laid out, what the plane of the Earth, how it's shaped with the circle on the square with the four corners, encapsulated by the solid structure of the dome, the seven heavens that are mentioned in certain texts and how that applies to the three heavens that we see predominantly spoken about within the scriptures. Sheol, the bottomless pit, as it's mentioned also in this particular passage. While studying all of that and then reviewing the mythological accounts as well as the testaments of these ancient explorers and different map makers like Mercator speaking about the testimonies of these different explorers, it was clear to me that all of this was tying together and that there was a underlying truth. And so the study of Isaiah 14 led me on this long quest. And just as you had mentioned, even Gerardus Mercator, in creating his map of the planisphere, or the, as far as the Earth laid out as an azimuthal equidistant projection map, that he has located in the center of this map what is called Rupus Negra, which means the black rock. And he describes this black lodestone magnetic mountain that is very, very tall, and it's supposed to be the tallest mountain in the world. And Enoch even describes it as being this alabaster mountain with a sapphire top, and that it reaches unto the throne room of the Most High God. And it is supposedly surrounded, encompassed by this grand eddy, this whirlpool called the Abysmal Chasm, or the navel of the world, the world's well. Helvelgamer is what it's referenced as in the Norse Eddas, but you find mention of this everywhere in most of the mythologies of the world. It's just that because we have not had this understanding, we are not able to connect all the dots to this particular puzzle of cosmological truth and the structure of it. But having new insight and understanding the world in different manner, and reviewing all of these manuscripts and all of these texts, I was able to see that, yes, there was underlying connections, and we have the witness of Enoch and Job also describing how at the North Pole, at the center of the Earth plane, the same reference to this Rupus Negra, this Mount Meru in the Vedic cosmology, which I also quote from and elaborate upon in great detail within this particular book, Paradise, the Sides of the North and the Mount of the Congregation. I find that whole collection of work, like the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries, describes in great detail the movement of the sun and the moon, as we shared in a different show that I did with you in describing that movement, how the sun moves back and forth between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. But these particular texts also make mention of Mount Meru, or Mount Meru, which is this black lodestone magnetic mountain at the center of the earthen plane. In the Greek cosmology, it's referenced as Mount Olympus. It's said to be the home of the demigods. In the Vedic cosmology, the demigods are living upon Mount Meru in similar fashion. And we see that in the Hebraic manuscripts, we have the mention of the Mount of the Congregation, and that it is located in the sides in the north. And that Lucifer, when he said that he wanted to exalt himself, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the Mount of the Congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. He's giving us a clue as to where the throne of God is located, and that it is above this Mount of the Congregation. But we notice also that after declaring all these things and that he wants to be and usurp the throne of the Most High God, Yahweh Elohim basically tells him, yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. And then, the sides of the pit and the bottomless pit, even in the description of John where he sees New Jerusalem descending out of the heavens. In my opinion, New Jerusalem is located above the vaulted dome. It's called the third paradise, and it's the place of the righteous. And we see that this location is also connected to the north, and that the bottomless pit is also connected to the north. And so understanding these different delineations, when you read and examine scriptures like Job and Enoch, Job 26 and Enoch chapter 18, where they speak specifically about there being an empty place or where hell lies naked before him, then it connects and makes sense that this abysmal chasm that is said to be the navel of the earth and the world's well, it is also said to be the dynamics which causes the different tidal cycles. And that if for 6 hours swallows all of the world's oceans and drains them into the abysmal chasm. And then 6 hours later, it spews all of these waters out in geyser and then creates what is the high tide cycle. So understanding all of these things and understanding that the dynamics of the structure of the earth in my opinion, seems much more plausible with regard to how there is this dual tidal cycle that switches directions every 6 hours, that if there is this huge whirling eddy, this giant vortex at the center of the earth and plane in surrounding this black lodestone magnetic mountain, why it is that all the compasses point north, and also how it is that, we have these tidal rhythms that are created by the draining of the world's oceans in and out of this particular whirling vortex. And we find a description of it in many of the, even in the stories of Odysseus and his travels and the Iliad, and also in Jason and the Argonauts and Aeneas, the story of Aeneas and declared by Virgil. So all of these things are connected together once you have such understanding.
Yeah, it's like, before when all of us had the Copernican model stuck in our heads, we would approach the scriptures with that bias and either just not see or completely ignore things in the Bible that clearly contradict that view. But when you throw that view out and you adopt the circular enclosed world model view, wow, I mean, the whole Bible is practically a whole new treasure trove of new information, things you've never seen before, even though you've highlighted it and underlined it and annotated it in the past. It has completely new meaning now. It's like a brand new book. But I mean, I know you like to read a lot of other ancient texts. Are you finding that it's just a whole brand new playground of even stuff that you've read many times before? It's a whole new adventure.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Everything is completely new because, I spent all that time studying all of this material from the heliocentric perspective. And, even with the connections of my first book that I wrote on this particular topic, same thing with you. I was never able to comprehend the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries because I was filtering all of that material through this heliocentric bias. But in embracing flat Earth and the cosmology, the geocentric cosmology, the described in the biblical narrative, even in the Genesis timeline on the first 4 days of creation, that embracing that possibility, reviewing that book once more with this new understanding, it was then that I was able to understand what Enoch was describing as the motions of the sun and the moon and the other heavenly luminaries, with the circle of the earth as a backdrop for description of these motions, almost as what we see depicted in these star trails of the time-lapse photography. And so applying, because Enoch describes the motions from east to west and then north back to east, which when you understand what he's talking about, it's a circle. He's describing these motions as a circle, which is also mentioned and described in many different places within not just the book of Enoch, but Solomon testifies to this, and in the second Enoch, all these different places that I've now found describing these specific motions. And so they're all confirming witness. But again, this knowledge was lost for at least the last 500 years because of our embrace of the Copernican heliocentric model. And so reviewing this material, even just that portion of the book of Enoch, with this understanding, I was then able to understand all of that material and wrote that book about it. But then reviewing, the firmament and the solid structured, what Enoch calls the roof of the world in chapter 88, I believe it is, in talking about the windows of heaven and all these different things as connected, the crystalline structure of the firmament, the way that the rainbows work, all of this stuff did not make sense. And even examining, the molten looking glass, the Amos 9:6, the vaulted dome of the earth, all these different allusions to the firmament and the solid structure of it, the rakia, I had to re-examine all of that. And, all of that led to the 10th book, the second book of this particular trilogy. But now, everything that I study, I'm having to review everything once more. And it is truly exciting because I realize that we are still less than 1% of the population with regard to embracing flat Earth as truth and the revelation of it, and reviewing the fullness of all of the wisdom texts and all of the knowledge that is out there, which most people are deceived upon because of their indoctrination into a matrix of illusion, which teaches them to accept as reality a false premise, a total deceit. And so most people have not made it past that hurdle yet in order to even be able to understand truth in the way that it is revealed in the ancient manuscripts. And so we are truly privileged and to be able to have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and a mind to understand. And in reviewing this material, to really be able to glean the truth that the ancients wrote and encoded within all that.
Yeah, and at this particular time in human history, we also have essentially the archives of the world at our fingertips.
Right.
So what a interesting time to live. And after all these years, some would say that we've known the world was a globe since 200 BC with Eratosthenes and Pythagoras and some of these other guys and whatnot. That this idea of a ball Earth, has been around for a while and really kicked into high gear, roughly 500 years ago, 1,500 years, whatever. It's a relatively small period of human history. We've had this, what we would call a Copernican model worldview, and yet there's this mountain of ancient literature that was from a completely different worldview. And the more your eyes are open to it, the more you see. I mean, I was looking something else up, and I happened to find myself in the Ginsberg's Legends of the Jews.
Yes.
And I just looked at the creation account, and
Yes.
like, boom, right there, second day. It says the second day of creation. On the second day, God brought forth four creations: the firmament, hell, fire, and the angels. The firmament is not the same as the heavens of the first day. It is the crystal stretched forth over the heads of the Hyot, from which the heavens derive their light, as the earth derives its light from the sun. This firmament saves the earth from being engulfed by the waters of the heavens. It forms the partition between the waters above and the waters below. It was made to crystallize into the solid it is by the heavenly fire, which broke its bounds and condensed the surface of the firmament. Thus fire made a division between the celestial and the terrestrial at the time of creation, as it did at the revelation on Mount Sinai. The firmament is not more than 3 fingers thick. Nevertheless, it divides 2 such heavy bodies as the waters below, which are the foundations of the netherworld, and the waters above, which are the foundations for the 7 heavens, the divine throne and the abode of the angels. And it just goes on from there. You're like,
I love this.
You're like, wow. I mean, that's, I don't know where they come up with the 3 fingers thick deal, but look, that's a pretty old description of something. And it's over and over and over again. We see this whole concept of an enclosed world, but I am really, really intrigued by this other concept that has permeated ancient literature, and that is this whole idea of this mount of the congregation, this high mountain of the gods. And we're about ready to go to break, but when we come back, I want to talk to you more about that specifically. And is that the meeting place of the divine council, as Dr. Michael Heiser would say, where the angels meet together? We'll talk about that when we come back. And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and I'm talking with my guest, Zen Garcia. We're discussing his new book, Paradise, Sides of the North, and the Mount of Congregation. And right before the break, we were talking about how so many different cultures around the world have written ancient literature that's available at our fingertips. We can look this stuff up, describing essentially a circular enclosed world under this thing called a firmament. And that's a fairly universal theme. But so also is this idea of this very large mountain in the center of this circle, called by a variety of different names, probably the most famous being Mount Meru, or the Mount of Congregation in Scripture. And right before the break, I was asking Zen, do you think that is well, first of all, do you think that is the place for the angels to meet? Is it like this courtyard where in Job, the sons of God, which are the angels, gathered together, and Satan was among them, and they had this little meeting with God? Dr. Michael Heiser calls it the divine council. Is that their meeting hall, so to speak?
In my opinion, it is. And you see in even in the other mythologies of the world, a description of the top of this mountain, spiritual Zion or Mount Olympus, Mount Meru, that the demigods, the rulers of this world, that they live there, and from there they watch and look down and peer upon the entirety of the earth. I also share in this particular book, and also the Firmament book, that the Most High God has established the heavenly temple too, above the vaulted dome, and that from there even the high angels, the archangels, and the angels which serve the Most High God, they also peer down from that strategic overlook, being at the center of the vaulted dome, that from there they can see the fullness of the extremity of the earth. Not that they, need to view it directly, but they can. And the firmament is also semi-transparent, and it could be that, I don't know if it in some way magnifies something as a lens, but it certainly could be.
So do you think Polaris then is what we call the North Star? Do you think it is basically the peephole of heaven, the portal through which you can look down from the throne room?
Absolutely. It is, in my opinion, the star which is indicative of the location of where the throne room of the Most High God is located. And we see this depicted also in such arcane and esoteric knowledge as the location of Jacob's ladder, that he describes, in my opinion, this these portals which lead where the angels are ascending and descending into the heavens and also down into Sheol. And we see even in the description of Job, where all the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, from walking up and down in it. See, his domain is the 7 levels of Sheol, which the hollow earth opening is this abysmal chasm where the navel of the world is, the world's ocean, the Havelgamer, the abysmal chasm. And it also describes in Revelation 19, where John speaks about seeing this vision in Revelation 21. And he carried me away in the spirit to a gray and high mountain and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven. He sees New Jerusalem, which, again, in my opinion, that is located above the Mount of the Congregation and above the vaulted dome near the heavenly throne room, that the place of the righteousness and the place of the elect is in the third heaven right now. And he also describes seeing the bottomless pit, and that it's all located in the same place. In my opinion, this is Jacob's ladder, and it's only at the North Pole that we see these, even the toroidal fields, the magnetic way that the primer field experiments, and the way that the magnetism of the Earth and the electromagnetic nature of the universe and creating these toroidal fields, these openings are at the north and the south, and they create these, these portals, these vortexes, which lead both up into the upper heavens to the throne room of the Most High God, and down into Sheol, into the domain of the devil, and the lower, Tartarus. We have the grave, Gehenna, and all of these different names. They're just different levels of Sheol, where we get our English word hell. But that is his place, and that's where the devils and the demons are located, even in this time and space. And when you read and study the different passages which speak about even the release of the locust army at the end of days, that it is from the north that they will be released. There's specifics to even the giants being confined in the sides of the north, and different passages in Isaiah which speak about the giant. In Joel chapter 2, this supernatural army being released at the end of days to decimate those not written into the books of life. And so all of these things are connected in similarity to what we're speaking about. Even in Matthew and Luke, it speaks about Satan taking Yeshua to an exceedingly high mountain and showing him all the kingdoms of the world.
Yeah, that was going to be my second point. So first point is you believe that is the Mount of the Congregation in the sense of the heavenly divine council. And my second question was going to be, and you're answering it right now, that would be the mountain, the exceeding high mountain, that would be the only reasonable, logical, tangible explanation, short of a vision or something supernatural, for Yeshua being able to see all the kingdoms of the world from one vantage point.
Right. And yes, of course, we know he has supernatural and spiritual sight to where, he knows all things and can see all things. But from a strategic overlook, a vantage point for seeing and showing somebody all the kingdoms of the world that surround and encompass, just like we see depicted on the map of the United Nations, with all of the continents encircling around the North Pole as the center of the Earth plane. That it ties it all up, in my opinion, as far as this exceedingly high mountain, which is said to be this Rupus Negra, the Mount Olympus, Mount Meru, that it is located there at the center of the earth plane, and that from that location, that this exceedingly high mountain would be that location, and that from there, yes, you can see in vantage all of the kingdoms surrounding, all of the continents surrounding this northern central point.
Wow. And you also mentioned the earlier the phrase "in the earth," and when I was really diving into the biblical narrative regarding flat Earth, I kept seeing, and I actually did a keyword search on the phrase "in the earth," and both in Hebrew and Greek, that phrase shows up a lot.
Yes. Right.
And you know, in the earth, short of hollow earth, which I do believe works in either model,
Right.
the globe or the flat model, you still have this inner earth Agartha thing that works either way. But I mean, for that phrase to be used all the time, not just in reference to, you know, under earth caverns or whatnot, it doesn't make sense on the globe to say, hey, I'm walking up and down in the earth. But
Right.
if it's an enclosed, if the whole thing is an enclosed Truman Show style system, then that's the only phrase that would actually make sense, because in the earth would mean inside the firmament.
Yes.
Which is where everything is, short of what's in heaven. It's
Right.
inside the firmament. So that was a big one for me. I'm like, in the earth. I mean, wow. And I forget what chapter it is in Enoch, but it's where I think it was Noah maybe is having a vision of the coming flood. It was either Noah or Enoch. Somebody is having a vision of the coming flood, and it says like in 4 places in one chapter that there were openings in the roof, and these torrents of water were coming through the openings in the roof, filling the enclosure.
Right. Right.
Like it's like, wow, this is just a big bathtub got filled up. That's how the
Right.
flood happened.
Exactly. Yeah. The lofty roof.
Yeah, the lofty roof, and you know, filling the earth. Well, it's in the earth. It's an enclosed system. But you're going even further. You're saying that the access to the heavenly realm is right above that in what we would call Polaris.
Yeah.
And if you were to slide down the mountain all the way, you'd also end up in the netherworld. You'd end up in
Yes.
in Hades. And you mentioned Joel 2, so I assume you also believe that the Joel 2 army is the same army as the Revelation 9 locusts.
Yes.
Okay. And so you think they're coming out of the north. And that is so crazy to think about. You know, kind of you have to rewire your thinking. Is you come from this, you know, Hal Lindsey, late great Planet Earth mindset, where, you know, back in, what was it, the 70s or whatever, there's a Time magazine article on the front page. It said something like China can field a 200 million man army. And of course, you know, the eschatology guys out there are like, ooh, see, that, you know, coming down from the north to attack Israel. They're coming down from Russia. They're coming down from China. No, we're not talking about the Russians. We're not talking about the Chinese. We're not talking about any human agencies. We're talking about the Joel 2 army locusts of Revelation chapter 9 coming up out of the bottomless pit. But you're saying they're coming up out of the bottomless pit out of the north.
Right.
Like you're just taking, and this is what I love about you, man. You're like, hey, that's what the Bible says. It's a literal interpretation.
Absolutely.
If I just take it literally, that's what it says. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look up the word north, even in the Strong's, you get it comes a derivative from this word Saphan,
Yeah.
and it means to hide, to treasure, to store up, to hide away, to be hidden, to lurk, to to hide from discovery. And so you have all of these passages to be protected, esteemed, hidden, set apart, privily, secret place. So you have all these connotations to what the North traditionally is. It's this mystical place that speaks about places like Asgard and Shambhala and Thule and even Atlantis. All these different locations of all these really ancient mythological cities and these different peoples, the Hyperboreans. And so you have all of this ancient knowledge and mythology connected to this particular place. We even have Reverend William Warren. He wrote this book called Paradise at the North Pole, the Cradle of Humanity. And in that particular book, which is a really excellent book of compiled mythologies from around the world about the North and the connections to these different things that we're speaking about, except that he's a heliocentrist, and he tries to filter all of that knowledge and make it fit the mold of the Copernican system. And he declares several times about how the ancients were primitive in their belief and their thinking, and he doesn't realize that we're the ones that were deluded and led astray in deceit. And so but the bulk of the content and the material that is contained within it, for us that have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, when reviewing that material, we're then able to apply it to what we know of as truth with regard to the cosmology. And that's really exciting, in reviewing all of this ancient material.
Yeah, now you referenced Job 26:7 a few times about stretching the north over the empty space. And that's one of those scriptures that even I've used many times myself to say, see, that the Earth's floating in space. It stretches out the north over the empty space and hangs the Earth on nothing. See, Earth's floating in space. Of course, now I've got a completely different view of that. And there's an article I wrote back in 2015 on this regarding the pillars of the Earth and the, hanging the Earth on nothing. People can check it out. They go to testingtheglobe.com/pillars.html. And in that blog, I was quoting a guy named Robert Schneider of the Berea College, and he wrote a fascinating article about Job 26:7, empty space or whatnot, and basically debunks the whole idea of that notion being a description of the Earth floating in space. That has nothing to do with that. And he did a whole exegesis on the word Zaphon, and what that is just a fascinating word. But more than just that one word or that one verse, that whole chapter is pretty trippy if you go back and read Job 26 with this understanding.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I think we should review that actually for the listeners that don't know what we're talking about. And I'll actually read it from the King James and also the Targum rendition of it as well. It says, "Dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing." And you're absolutely correct. So many people use this as confirmation that the earth is, out there floating in the void of space as it circles once daily and annually orbiting around the sun, which in truth, this has nothing to do with that, because as you said in Job chapter 9, he describes the earth being fixed upon pillars.
Right, exactly.
And so it's not out there, just hanging upon nothing. And what he's describing here is this abysmal chasm, the opening at the north that we're talking about. So I'll read it from the Targum rendition just to give you an alternative perspective. And this, again, is the more ancient translation. It predates, I'm not exactly sure when the Psalms were translated, but I know it predates our King James and the English translations. It says this: "Is it possible that the mighty who are decayed will recover when they are below the waters in their camps? Sheol is revealed before him, and the grave and Abaddon have no cover," which those are different names for the different levels of Sheol, of hell.
Well, that's also the king over the bottomless pit is same word, Abaddon, destruction.
Right. Mm-hmm. "He it is who stretches the north upon the void. He erects the earth over the waters without anything to support it, who binds up the rain in his clouds, and the cloud is not rent under it. He holds tightly the thick darkness about his throne, so that the angels will not see him. He spreads the clouds of his glory over it like a curtain. He decreed that the firmament should dwell upon the surface of the waters as the boundary between light and darkness. The pillars of the heaven tremble and are shaken by his wrath. And so again, in this, the fullness of this particular passage from verse 5 through 11, we have the connection of Sheol, the bottomless pit, and the mount of the congregation, the throne of glory, and the Most High being seated above it, looking down, watching over all of it. And that because it is at the north that this bottomless pit, this abysmal chasm, is spread open and has no covering, that he can peer down from, his vantage point being at the very center of the vaulted dome and look directly into this abysmal chasm. And so that's why, it's described as having no covering. And it's described here, he it is who stretches the north upon the void, because that's where it is located. And we see this also spoken about by Enoch. When you revisit chapter 18, he makes mention of this particular place. I won't read the whole thing, but I will read a small portion of it. He says, arising in the midst of heaven and of earth and constituting the pillars of heaven, I saw the winds which turned the sky, which caused the orb of the sun and the stars to set. And over the earth I saw the winds which support the clouds. I saw the path of angels. I perceived at the extremity of the earth the firmament of heaven above it. Then I passed on towards the south, where burnt both by day and night 6 mountains formed of glorious stones, 3 towards the east, 3 towards the south, and those which were towards the east were of variegated stone, one of which was marguerite and another of antimony. Those towards the south were of red stone. The middle one reached to heaven like the throne of God, a throne composed of alabaster, the top of which was of sapphire. I saw too a blazing fire hanging over all the mountains. Then he goes on to say that over these fountains also I perceived a place which had neither the firmament of heaven above it, nor the solid ground underneath it, neither was there water above it, nor anything on wing, but the spot was desolate. And so, in my opinion, when you examine these particular descriptions by Enoch and Job, it connects to what Jacob describes as the ladder of the angels. These ascending and descending portals, which are located at the sides of the north. That the mount of the congregation is there, this wide, hollow earth entrance, this abysmal chasm, the bottomless pit. All of these things are connected to, in my opinion, the same thing.
Now, you mentioned a wide, hollow earth chasm, and for some of us, our entrance into flat earth research really kind of goes back to Admiral Byrd. And when I had watched Mark Sargent's Flat Earth Clues videos, that was the second video in the series, was the Byrd Wall. And it caught my attention because I had done quite a bit of research on Admiral Byrd regarding inner Earth, hollow Earth theory, Agartha, and all that stuff for my seed project. So I was familiar with Byrd's work in the north, but wasn't really up on what he did in the south, other than, I knew about Operation High Jump and whatnot. And, there's all kinds of speculation about, the Nazis went down there and aliens are down there and, all kinds of stuff is down there. But what, when I was first looking into Byrd, you see, I think it was 1940. No, I think it was like in the 20s, actually. I don't remember. But he had spent some time up in the north, and supposedly, according to his journal, he, I believe, flew into an opening in the north and came back describing inner Earth. So, when we look into this kind of research, that seems to validate that story a little bit. Have you looked into that?
I have, and whether it, nobody really knows how large this opening is, but it is described, in different stories, like the Smoky God. It describes they were just cruising along and went into a river that went into this hollow earth entrance, and then met in that entrance these group of giants. In another story, it talks about how this in the story of Odysseus, he describes being able to see down all the way into the interior of the earth and seeing the sandy bottom. In the Greek mythology, it describes, the whole realm of Hades being as an entrance from this particular place, and that it leads down into very, very deep chasms, and that there's all these other worlds, Agartha and Shambhala, and all these different worlds of the demigods are said to be located within this particular complex in this vortex. And so how big it is, we don't know. Can you fly into it? I don't know, but it is definitely associated to these ancient mythological accounts of these different cities. It also says in the Legend of the Jews, in describing this particular, because it mentions the void in that particular text as well, and it also describes about how the firmament comes together in the south, the west, and the east, but not in the north, because of course the firmament rises in apex and joins in pinnacle in the north, and so it would make sense that the firmament is not described as connecting to the earth in the north. But it describes how when you get to this hollow earth entrance, that a person could walk for 500 years into its interior, and that's how broad and wide the space is. So it's massive once you enter into the chasm of the earth, and then enter into the hollow earth, into those particular interior worlds.
Wow. All right. Well, on that note, we'll talk more when we come back from the break. And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba. For the second hour of the broadcast, I'm talking with my guest, Zen Garcia, and we're discussing his new book, Paradise, Sides of the North, and the Mount of Congregation. And right before the break, we were discussing, this big hole in the north that Admiral Byrd and others have gone into. And, it seems like when you look into the literature of various cultures, especially like the Norse myths and legends and whatnot, this is a physical place that is actually apparently accessible. And if you kind of really let that sink in, that's kind of freaky. As to what we actually have access. Well, maybe that's why they shut down the north and won't let you fly over it and go up there. But if you look on Google Earth, at the north, it looks like just this big open sea area. And a lot of times on Google Earth, you'll see these little icons that are little picture icons you can click on, and it shows, where somebody took a picture, in that location. And so you could see pictures, pretty not quite at the center, but pretty close, kind of a rim. There's some pictures of ships and whatnot that have gone up there, and we're led to believe that submarines and from the United States and Russia do patrols up there, checking up on each other and whatnot. And so you're like, well, where's the room? Where do we have room for this Mount Meru thing? If you're looking at something like Google Earth, but when you've seen the maps that depict, it looks like an island that's been quartered, with the
Right.
with rivers. It doesn't necessarily have to be all that big.
Right.
Not like a huge continent or something. I mean, it can still be there and be, relatively small, comparatively speaking, if we're looking at like Greenland or something, and still be there with enough water around it such that all these stories of ships going up there and submarines and whatnot. Both can still be possible.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. In the stories, as far as like John Dee, he received a letter from Gerardus Mercator describing this particular area and this particular lodestone island. Well, it's an island surrounded by this whirlpool eddy, but he says that the mountain is only 33 miles wide. Um, and
33.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, interesting. 33, right?
And John
But
D was asking about this.
right, yeah, John Dee. He's very interested, and they, when you really look at and examine about paradise, it seems like all of the elites and Catherine the Great and Edward sitting on the throne over there in the UK, they were all interested. Even Arthur of Camelot fame was said to have made a journey trying to get towards the north, and he had sent this priest up there who, according to the text, the Invencio Fortunata, was said to have made this journey several times to the north, and describes what he has seen with regard to this mountain and also this whirlpool eddy, and he gave his testimony to the King of Norway and also to the King of England and made them privy to this knowledge. But John Dee, he was very interested in what was going on there up in the north, and even Catherine the Great, she sent expeditions up that way, and so there was a lot of interest in the north, of course, in being also where the fallen angels themselves settled, and there being this mother culture, this pre-Adamic, antediluvian culture that after, we have the stories, the mythologies of Atlantis and the destruction that was brought down upon that particular culture, and that in the Emerald Tablets it speaks about a diaspora, and that even thought the Emerald Tablets and this Atlantean priest king, that he was one of those that had broken away and split from this culture and went to Egypt, to the land of Chem, and brought knowledge to them and introduced them to some of this forbidden and these heavenly secrets. And it was said that there was 5 different groups that broke out into different parts of the world, some to even, the ancient Mayan or the Aztec and that culture, the Olmec, down there in South America, and in Japan we have the culture of the civilization said to have been seeded by dragons, and that Thoth was, one of these hybrid beings. And so we have a depiction of the Anunnaki as these seraphic dragon-type entities. And so all of this, in my opinion, again, looking at the ancient mythologies and the way that they connect with the biblical narrative, we get this particular story of the fallen angels being cast out, these seraphic angels being cast out long ago, and then trying to enslave the pre-Adamic man, and then the Most High creating his own man, and then the modern age starting, the fall of Adam and Eve, and then the enmity between the seed lines, all of these different things taking place, and all still happening, and the giants, the watchers, that particular fall, and how it all ties together. We see this reflected in the Sumerian kings list of the most ancient reigns of these demagogic kings, 24,000 years, and what seems to us just absolutely bizarre, but again, these were not human type beings. They were these fallen angelic beings, and completely different from the kind of human kings that sat on the lines way after, the pharaohs and these different kings, even though they had said to be long spans of reign, nothing like thousands of years or anything of mention in that regard. But anyways, all of the stories of Atlantis, and then again this mother culture having existed there at the north and then being destroyed, the diaspora happening and all these different cultures coming up pretty much at the same time. You know, like India, we have all the stories of the Vedic, the wars in heaven that occurred there, and the stories of Vimanas and all these different ancient texts that people can't understand and conceive of even today. And even in the Vedic cosmology, they also describe the earth as a Bhumandala, this four-petaled lotus, described exactly in the same way as Eden being separated by these four rivers, as is described in Genesis, you know, with the biblical Eden. And so the same kind of story repeated over and over and over by all these different cultures, just in different manner. And the truth of it all has been lost for so very long. But in my opinion, again, because we are that generation which the Most High said he would be pouring out the Spirit upon all flesh, and all the secrets are being revealed, that so much is coming to light now. And those of us that are and have embraced new possibility and that have entertained such things as flat earth cosmology, and, you know, not just ridiculed it, but actually tried to investigate and try to debunk it, and have since come to understand it as truth, that such knowledge and such wisdom that has been locked away by all these ancient traditions are all again coming to light, and we're being able to understand the bigger picture, the larger story, in greater manner than has ever been possible. You know, with all the access, the internet, all the stories being a keystroke away, you know, from the comforts of our own homes, not even having to go to libraries and pull up all these ancient sources. You know, we're at the comfort of our own home. We don't have to travel anywhere. We get up and log in. You know, you don't even have to brush your teeth if you don't want to. I mean, just the study of wisdom and the access to all knowledge is so incredible that ignorance is, you know, there's no excuse for it in this day and age.
Yeah, definitely not. And, you know, this is the kind of thing that's just fun to explore, but, you know, from a literary standpoint. But, you know, I mean, the North Pole, that's not that far away.
Right.
For us. I mean, people are like, well, why don't you just go down to the Antarctica and go see if you can find the dome? And no, I'm not interested in that level of extreme cold and hostile environments.
Me either, brother.
I mean, I've worked in cold places before. I'm not going to do that voluntarily. But the North is quite different. You know, if the Earth is a ball, you would think that both poles of the ball would have the same climate and conditions, but that's not what we find. It's vastly different, and it's different times of the year. I mean, there's actually a fairly thriving wildlife, both plant and animal, in the North. And, you know, it's certainly cold, but not nearly as cold as it is in Antarctica. And when you think about, lots of ancient cultures have apparently made pilgrimages up there and documented it. I got to tell you, that's kind of tempting, man. It's like,
right.
That would be something I would be interested in going to see. Do you think it's, I mean, the ancients seem to write about it as if it is a very physical thing that you can actually look at. Do you think it's still like that? Do you think it's cloaked maybe now, or what?
I think it's somewhere in the middle, that there is a supernatural aspect to it, and that the Most High has protected it somehow and in some manner, and that, you know, almost like that island, Wonder Woman's island, you know.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. And so whether that there's truth to that now, I have no idea, but it reminds me, there's a book called The History of the Rechabites, where this particular people that were worshipers of the Most High God, they live on this island that is, even though it's part of this physical time-space dimensionality, it is still protected in the manner that we see that, as far as Wonder Woman, that particular island. And so if the North, it makes me wonder if it is protected in similar manner. But again, I don't know. And then it would take somebody traveling northward. From what I understand, they don't allow you to go, towards the north. They have all that on lockdown, and nobody's able to fly directly over it. And whether people are able to patrol, and what they would even see if they were in submarines, or I have no idea. But that is a fascinating story and a fascinating question. And yeah, I would be interested in learning more. And I do know that there's certain people that have created a group to explore that particular side of it. But who knows? I remember when Brooks Agnew was wanting to take a trip up there and was trying to raise funds to get an expedition together to see whether there was this Hollow Earth entrance and portal up that way, but was never successful in raising the funds. And so, yeah, I would be interested, because you would think that, like Admiral Byrd, that you wouldn't even have to go by boat. You should be able to reach it in flight. But again, you're not able to fly over it. And whether they have that on lockdown as they do the perimeter of the Antarctic Circle, I just don't know what you would run into, and whether it is cloaked in some way, even like the King Kong Island, the way that the fog and the mist and all that. And so it makes one wonder. But certainly the ancients, many of them describe, as I said, even Odysseus and the stories of Aeneas and Jason and the Argonauts, all of them encountered this north, and that particular, it was called a sea monster, but it's speaking about this eddy at the north. It's called Charbardus in the Greek mythology, but that also is specific to what we're talking about with regard to the abysmal chasm.
So it's just this massive whirlpool. Like if we were to visually depict this, you'd have this huge whirlpool that has some, like a big hole in the middle and some distance, you don't know how much, but some distance between the edge of the whirlpool and the mountain itself that comes up from Hades, I guess,
right.
and goes all the way up to, at some point just below
the vaulted dome.
The vaulted dome. Wow. I mean, that's just, it's so bizarre to think about. And when you're talking about the attributes of the mountain, you mentioned antimony was one of the attributes. Now, that wasn't the actual Mount Meru itself. That was talking about the mountains of the quadrant islands around it, right?
Right. Yeah, supposedly the 4 different islands which surround the Mount of the Congregation. Enoch says that it is specifically made of alabaster and has a sapphire pinnacle. And we see mention of this sapphire in many different texts. In Exodus 24:10, Moses and the 70 elders and Aaron, they describe seeing the Most High seated upon a paved work of sapphire. And John in Revelation also speaks about the sapphire throne and the Most High seated upon a sea of glass like unto crystal. Zechariah, Enoch, all of them describe the same thing. Ezekiel as well. They all are describing the throne of the Most High God as being sapphire, and also that there's crystalline structure, which I interpret to be the vaulted dome, and that rainbows and fire. It speaks of the sea of glass mingled with fire, And I take that to be sort of like what we see with the Aurora Borealis, that is also connected to the north. And all of these things are related to the same, in my opinion. All these phenomena are connected to the throne, the heavenly temple being located at the north, and also the abysmal chasm being located. They describe in the Smoky God this black sun and this particular inner sun, and how all that works. I'm not sure as well, but there seems to be something to that as well.
When we're thinking about magnetism, obviously this thing has some serious magnetic qualities to it. What do you think? What do you think is going on in the South, magnetically speaking? I mean, what do you think? I mean, if we're not talking about a North and South pole on a ball, I kind of envision the world like a big subwoofer speaker pointing up with a dome over it.
Right.
You know, it's got this big magnet in the middle. But what do you think is, magnetically speaking, extending to the South?
I don't think that that there is a South Pole, but I do believe that there is connections between the North and the South, hollow Earth entrances, pathways. There's said to be tunnels connecting everything within the interior of the Earth, and we see even in the story of the Olaf Jansson in the Smoky God, he describes them going in through the hollow entrance at the north, but then coming out of the south. And he believes that we're on a ball. But in my opinion, if you decrypt that whole story according to what we know now, that we are living on a flat plane, then it makes sense that there are these connections, and that these different rivers, even in the Greek mythology, it describes all these different rivers, the Styx, the river of the dead, and all these different rivers as flowing through the interior and coming out in different places. And so I do believe that there are connections. And also with regard to the South, we've seen as of late, especially over this past year, so many stories talking about these different pyramidal complexes being discovered down there in the South. And this is nothing new, because when you look at even New Schwabenland and the connections to the Hitler and his particular regime and the Third Reich, and how they were interested in the deep South, and Antarctica, they describe in Operation Tabarine, which is this British SAS, these special forces that went down there tracking Hitler and his regime and trying to look into what they were doing there in Antarctica. They describe finding a base where they were building upon and into an already ancient structure, in the same way that Phil Schneider describes them when they built these deep underground bases in these different parts of the world, especially here in America, that they were building on top of already other ancient structures, which we see in Thomas's Castella. He talks about how the very lower levels of the Dulce base, that they were inhabited and they were under the control of, these extraterrestrial alien type reptilian entities. And so we see these kind of stories repeated all over. And so in the Operation Tabarine, there's description of even some of these hybrid polar men. And it's a fascinating story. People can read about it themselves and examine it.
What is the text? What's it called?
Just looking up the Operation Tabarine and the British SAS, and what they encountered as far as looking into New Schwabenland. I do believe that Steve Quell wrote a book about this called Empires Under the Ice or something of that nature. And I think he describes, I haven't read that book, so I don't know, but I think it's talking about some of the same kind of things. But if people look at the British SAS in Antarctica and its connections to Hitler. I'm sure you'll find the story that I'm speaking about, but there's specific mention of them, the Hitler and his people building into an already and connecting with an ancient, already constructed site down there in the Antarctic. And so I think that is also connected to what is being discovered with regard to some of these pyramidal complexes and some of these things that are now coming to light with some of this ice melt. But as you were talking about with regard to the differences between the North and the South, in Antarctica, it's covered over by 2 miles of ice, which is completely different than what we see in the North. And just as you said, when the sun reaches its pinnacle there at the summer solstice and reaches the Tropic of Cancer, we know the sun is circling very tightly and moving very slowly. And that's the reason for the dramatic environmental shifts, and that all of the animals and all of the plants and the mosses and all of that, they all have their spawning times and seasons all connected to when the sun reaches that particular extreme northern elevation. And because it is moving, everything grows, all the ice melts and turns into rivers of water. And so the whole breeding season is catered to and surrounding that particular time, and completely different from when the sun reaches its southern extremity as far as the Tropic of Capricorn. It's moving very quickly because it's moving in it has to cover a lot more distance because its circle is a lot larger as well. And so there's nothing the same with regard. And if we were living on a ball, there should be parallels. I mean, there should be correlations between the North and the South that there isn't.
Yeah. You mentioned Steve Quayle, and that whole crowd, Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, Skywatch TV, that whole crowd, they're really hot on Hollow Earth right now. And I don't know if you've been watching any of their videos. I mean, they've got some really good stuff on it, and people like Jim Williamson and others have been into this for quite some time. And that stuff is awesome. I mean, it's some really great research, but they're stopping short
right.
of how deep this really goes. I mean, I'm like, oh, guys, you're like 2 inches from the line.
Yeah.
Just cross over.
Right. No,
they'll never do it.
They won't do it. No, they won't do it. No.
No.
And I know that for whatever reason they just won't go there. They won't even entertain it as possibility, and they, for whatever reason, also will not connect themselves in any manner to those of us that do and have, which you know that better than I do.
Yeah,
so.
That's the truth. Well, I can tell you why they were not going to get into it. It's one word: money.
Yeah, right. And all of their research is based
and credibility. They don't want
they don't
want to lose
that.
credibility.
Yeah,
all right.
That's the big thing, I think.
Yeah, that's the big one. And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, for the final half-hour segment of the broadcast. I'm talking with my guest, Zen Garcia, and we're discussing his book, Paradise, Sides of the North, and the Mount of the Congregation. And just one more time for our listeners, where can people find this and your other books if they're interested in learning more?
The best lookout to find the complete collection of all my works is sacredwordpublishing.net. But you can also find them on Lulu, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, all the major portals, book-selling portals. So.
All right. Awesome. Right before the break, we were talking about some of the, shall we say, bigger personalities and ministries out there that like to research the weird, the paranormal, the outside-the-box stuff. They will not touch this subject. No. It's a shame, though, because, I mean, as we've been discussing, when it comes to especially ancient literature, there is, just huge volumes of incredibly fascinating information. And if they'll just take what they're already looking into, one step further, they'll see how much more significant the research that they are even now doing
Right.
really is. But
Yeah.
oh well.
Yeah. I fully agree. Again, because in my opinion, I mean, I know of no greater deception than that which is tied to the cosmology and the fact that we live in a geocentric enclosed world system. And I mean, really, the star trails, everything, all points to the fact that you can use Polaris as a navigational tool during the nights, and that has been that way for thousands of years. You know, if we're moving on a planet which is part of a solar system, which is also encircling in some grand universal center, and then that is also circling some grand galactic center, how the stars have remained similar with regard to the zodiac and the way that everything is for thousands of years is just beyond, comprehension. I mean, it's only by understanding that we truly do live in a geocentric enclosed world system that any of that can make any sense. But again, so many people, because they think this topic ludicrous, as we did when we first began to examine it. I know I was very hesitant for a very long time to even begin the examination of it, not wanting to waste my time, thinking all that had been settled 500 years ago by greater minds than me. But it's very easy to determine that there is no curvature and that the Earth is not moving. And those two things, no matter what you think about the shape of the Earth, when you apply that and embrace that as true knowledge and as real scientific and confirmable experimentation, then you have to reconsider the whole entire paradigm of who we are, where we are, and what this world is really all about.
Well, yeah, and also as part of that, realizing that we are not the pinnacle of evolution. I don't believe in evolution anyway.
Yeah, totally.
But that even those who claim to not believe in evolution still seem to subscribe to the idea that we are, at the apex. We are,
right.
Human intelligence has never been like it is today, and it's the exact opposite. It's like the further back you look, the more advanced. And I mean, there's stuff that with all of our wisdom, understanding, computers and everything, technology, even today, we can't figure out what they're doing. And so, of course, ancient aliens must have done it or something. But when you look into this from a historical perspective and certainly from a biblical perspective, you quickly realize the whole ancient aliens hypothesis goes out the window.
Right.
We are the center stage, main attraction. We're all there. We're the biggest thing, short of heaven, that there is the Earth. Everything else above us, including the so-called galaxies and everything else, is way smaller and way closer.
Yes.
Which totally nullifies any notion of, ancient aliens or visitors coming from outer space, which is actually really comforting.
Yes.
And also, there's a new series that is on, I think it's, what am I watching on Amazon Prime, I think, called Salvation. And it's a story about I think it was MIT person, somebody at MIT, had created some kind of algorithm tracking things in the solar system or whatnot, and figured out that there's an asteroid headed for the Earth in like 6 months' time or something like that. And so only a very few people know this in the highest levels of the Pentagon and whatnot. And, the whole story basically is how are we going to save ourselves from this asteroid that's coming, and can we get to Mars as an alternative if the Earth gets obliterated and all that. And, and the show is basically spun off of whatever it was that came down over Russia a year or two ago. I don't know if you remember seeing the videos on YouTube of some kind of looked like a meteor or something.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody got all these traffic cam footage of it and whatnot. And now, though, I don't know if you've ever seen the interview with Dr. Carol Rawson, I think is her name. and she's talking about her time when she was an intern and was like a
Yeah.
part, with Werner von Braun.
Werner Braun, yeah.
Yeah, and he said, look, first there's gonna be tension between the United States and Russia. Then it's gonna be third world crackpots and stuff, and these are all things that we're gonna keep everybody's attention and try to create space-based weapons for defense. And then it's gonna be asteroids. Well, there's gonna be terrorism. Then it's gonna be asteroids, and then the final card is aliens. And he says all of it is a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And if the story is to be believed, the last decade or two of his life, he was trying to get somebody to help him make the world understand that this is all a lie. And then when he dies, he's got Psalm 19:1, on his
Right.
tombstone.
Right.
You're like, okay, yeah, the guy was a Nazi, and then he was, part of the lie that was the NASA Apollo space program. But maybe at the end of his life, it looks like, at least if her story is to be believed, he was trying to come out with the truth and let us know.
Well,
and
he
so
was certainly letting somebody know,
he was letting somebody know, and she's carried the torch for sure. Been out there, she's like, I'll testify under oath in front of Congress, whatever. And when you think about that, it's like, okay, so all of these reports that we see that do come out right according to that script, that is all a lie, of near Earth asteroids coming that potentially could be an extinction level, create an extinction level event. That all goes out the window. It's like all of a sudden you live in peace, realizing nothing's out there that can hurt us, and there's no other aliens out there that's going to come visit us. But if something does show up pretending to be that, well, you better be prepared to know what the truth is and what is not the truth. And
absolutely.
Like you said, this topic, unlike any other, I think just blows the lid off huge amounts of lies that have been taught to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And also consider this, that, the Sumerian mythology that goes back 6,000 years, and which everybody believes is to be the most ancient post-flood language and culture and civilization, even though the Thracians, which is something new that just came out, and their language being decrypted in 2006, they were Christians, and they had prophecies about the coming of Christ. And because they predated the Sumerians by 2,000 years, it shows and confirms that the pagan mythologies and that Christianity is not a plagiarism of the Sumerian pagan beliefs, and that the knowledge of Christ and his coming and his virgin birth are all encoded into these ancient Thracian chronicles, which again predate the ancient Egyptians and the Sumerians by 2,000 years, and affirm that the most ancient peoples knew about the coming of Christ and wrote about it and passed on these traditions to their people, which even Adam, when he was cast out of paradise, which is a book I'm writing right now on the ancient prophecies of Christ, he was told that Christ would come in the flesh and be born of the line of Judah and of the seed of David, of his bloodline, the seed of promise, and that he would redeem them and rectify the fall and then return them to their former estate, which is all occurred exactly how it was laid out. But anyways, in the Sumerian mythology, they have depicted in their cosmology this heliocentric system. Mm-hmm. And because we know that is a lie, it shows you just how deep and how far back the deception goes, that the Anunnaki, as the creators and as this demonic, ancient, alien, fallen, angelic race, that they seeded and implanted into their mythos knowledge of this heliocentric system, specifically, in my opinion, for what is now the set time of bringing forth the Antichrist as this alien god, and that the strong delusion is completely dependent upon buying into the Darwinian Copernican heliocentric model, because it's only by having an ever expanding that all of the stars in the skies are suns and that they all have possible planetary systems that these extraterrestrials could be coming to save us from ourselves, and that they seeded us and created us so long ago, So, as you said, once you have understanding that all of that is bunk, all of that goes out the window, and what we are dealing with are the fallen angel demons that have been cast out of the heavens so long ago and locked away here under the firmament with us since that time. They're not from out there. They've been right here with us the whole time. And so, they're parading themselves as gods, as they have been the whole time. And now they're establishing this whole extraterrestrial, ancient alien mythos that they are coming from these distant worlds and that they were the ones that created us long ago, jumping the gun on evolution, creating us from one of our monkey ancestors. And so all of that, the whole premise of it, when you're in an enclosed world system and that the stars are not other, the wandering stars are not other Earth-like systems, that they're just luminaries, and they're very much smaller, and they're very much closer, and even the sun and the moon are, not massive size, 108 times the diameter of the Earth across its middle, as is put forth by the whole astrophysics community. All of that can be thrown out the window, but the whole thing with the Sumerian mythology, it just shows us that the roots of this deception go back 6,000 years.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we are down to like the last 15 minutes or so, and this is a big book you got here. I know we
yeah.
barely scratched the surface. I mean, it's like 450 pages or so. Wow, and it's almost like, what do I ask right now that doesn't open up a
Yeah, right. A huge, yeah.
Well, I'll just say, look, we got 12 minutes left, and where would you like to take us as far as this research and the importance of understanding this thing that's in the center of the circle of the Earth?
Let me share a story with you from the Iliad about Odysseus, and you'll see that from this story that what is described as the sea monster Sharperdus, that it is alluding to the same thing that we are describing with regard to the abysmal chasm. He also makes mention of this particular magnetic Lone Mountain. And so I think this will help the listening audience to get a better grasp of how the mythology, the ancient mythology, also connects with the biblical narrative. It says,
cool.
The sea monster Charbardus was believed to live under a small rock on one side of a narrow channel. Opposite her was Skyla, another sea monster, that lived inside a much larger rock. The sides of the strait were within a narrow airshot of each other, and sailors attempting to avoid one of them would come in reach of the other to be between Skyla and Charbardus, therefore a means to be presented with two opposite dangers, the task being to find a route to avoid both. Thrice a day, this was, I guess, the whole title system back then was sped up.
3 times instead of 2?
Yeah, 3 times instead of 2. Thrice a day, Charbardus swallowed a huge amount of water before belching it back out again, creating large whirlpools capable of dragging a ship underwater. In some variations of the story, Charbardus was simply a large whirlpool instead of a sea monster. A later myth makes Charbardus the daughter of Poseidon and Gaia and living as a loyal servant to her father. I'll skip down just a little bit because that was a Wikipedia about the particular Charbardus. But the story, and not far from the shore which were before spoke of on the west where the ocean extends without bounds, is that very deep abyss of waters which we commonly call the ocean's navel. This is an account from an ancient explorer. It is said twice a day to suck the waves into itself and to spew them out again, as is proved to happen along all these coasts where the waves rush in and go back again with fearful rapidity. By the whirlpool of which we have spoken, it is asserted that ships are often drawn in with such rapidity that they seem to resemble the flight of arrows through the air, and sometimes they are lost lost in the gulf with a very frightful destruction. Often, just as they are about to go under, they are brought back again by a sudden shock of the waves, and they are sent out again thence with the same rapidity with which they were drawn in. In the Gesta Hamburgsen, Archbishop Adalbert speaks about a team of noble Frisians which, setting sail in hopes to explore the North Polar region in 1035 AD, heading north beyond Greenland, of a sudden they fell into that numbing ocean's dark mist which could hardly be penetrated with the eyes. And behold, the current of the fluctuation ocean whirled back to its mysterious fountainhead, and with most furious impetuosity drew the unhappy sailors, who in their despair now thought only of death, on to chaos. This, they say, is the abysmal chasm, that deep in which report has it that all the backflow of the sea, which appears to decrease, is absorbed and in turn revisited, as the mounting fluctuation is usually described. As the partners were imploring the mercy of God to receive their souls, the backward thrust of the sea carried away some of their ships, but its forward ejection threw the rest far behind the others. Freed thus by the timely help of God from the instant peril they had before their eyes, they seconded the flood by rowing with all their might. This is talking about, what causes the ocean tides. But even in this ancient account, we see the story of this particular, abysmal chasm, and how it expunges all of the world's oceans twice a day, three times in the story of Odysseus and Jason and the Argonauts. But again, in my opinion, it is this whirlpool, this grand eddy, this ancient vortex there at the center of the earth plane surrounding the black lodestone mountain, that causes the high tide and the low tide twice daily. And so, in my opinion, when you study some of these ancient accounts, these ancient stories, all of this ties together in a manner that even the biblical narrative and those passages that we brought forth from Job and others, all of that comes to light in greater manner than understood previously.
Yeah, I was looking at the Job passage in the World English Bible translation, which is a translation I've actually come to really enjoy. And it says, Job 26, beginning in verse 5, the departed spirits tremble, those beneath the waters and all that live in them. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. He stretches out the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. He binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not burst under them. He encloses the face of his throne and spreads his cloud on it. He has described a boundary on the surface of the waters and to the confines of light and darkness. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his rebuke. He stirs up the sea with his power, and by his understanding he strikes through Rahab. And then verse 13, by his spirit the heavens are garnished, his hand has pierced the swift serpent. And I'm assuming verse 13, has pierced the swift serpent, is a reference to the previous verse, verse 12, striking through Rahab. What have you found? I mean, have you made any connections with this whole Rahab thing? Because in the past, when we were in the Copernican spinning heliocentric globular Earth model, I've had people on my show before, like, what's his name? Doug Elwell and others talking about Rahab.
Belt,
yeah, the asteroid belt, and the whole idea that there was a planet out there one time.
Right.
That
where
was
the asteroid belt was.
Yeah, it was called Rahab, and it was struck and busted in half, and that's why we have the asteroid belt is like half the planet, and the rest of it spun off into this orbit and solidified and basically became the Earth. But there was this whole idea of Rahab the serpent, and tying that to other ancient myths as an explanation for basically the Copernican model that we're now in. Have you looked at any of that in light of this new research, and does Rahab play any part in the mythology that you just read, as far as a serpent being identified?
Well, no, I haven't examined it as far as with regard to the new cosmology, but the only thing that I can think that it might be connected to, there's a book out there called the Book of the Earth, and it speaks about some of the ancient models, and it also speaks about how the Earth a long time ago had all been joined together, and the dry land was all one massive like Pangaea, and it was in the shape of a turtle shell, and that at some point the Most High, and some people connected to when the Tower of Babel fell, and also when
the Peleg expansion.
all the languages were changed, and all the people were separated into tribes, that it was then that the Pangaea was struck, and it was separated into different continental landmasses. But in that particular book, the Book of the Earth, people can find these ancient native stories that speak about. That's why they call it Turtle Island. And even in the Vedic cosmology, it makes mention of something to that nature. And so perhaps that, that's what it could be speaking about. I don't know, because again, I haven't reviewed it in great detail, but I know it's certainly not connected to another planet out there in an asteroid belt, because the whole solar system as is defined. And again, this is another one of the deceptions that was put forth in the Sumerian mythology, the Enuma Elish and the story of creation and its connection to the solar system. Because all of that, even with what you described, that there was this planet out there where the asteroid belt is, and that part of it became the Earth, and part of it remains the asteroid belt. And yet I know now that these planets and the wandering stars are not moving in circle around the sun, but that they're moving in circle around Polaris, and that Polaris is the center of the so-called universe, and everything moves in circle around it, as is depicted in the star trails over the course of an evening. And so that's a really good question, and that's one I'm going to have to explore more in depth. But again,
in the other paradigm, there was all kinds of fanciful stories that I subscribed to and talked about myself. In that, it's like we said earlier, the Bible's a brand new book. So much of ancient literature just comes completely to life in a different way than it was before. I would be interested to see where a course of study would take you if you were to look at Rahab, and that whole idea within this new cosmological worldview.
Yeah, I'm certainly going to do that, because you've definitely piqued my interest, and that's something that I do want to know more. And so, I'm going to examine that and see what I can find, and I'll let you know. And
that'll make what, book 16 or something?
15 with regard to my own, but yeah.
Wow, man, that's just awesome. Well, as always, Zen, it's a pleasure talking with you, and I look forward to diving more into your book. Actually didn't get a chance to read it on the plane. I was planning on it last time we did this interview that didn't work out, but I had it to go with me on the plane, and ended up sitting next to this guy that talked my ear off the entire flight.
Yeah, that always happens, right?
Yeah, and then the second flight I was hacking my brains out and sick as a dog. But
when you get some time, there's a lot there for you. I certainly sent you a library. So.
For sure. Well, yeah, you did, and this book alone is 450 something pages. So I want to recommend you guys listening, go check it out. Zen, thanks so much for coming on tonight. It's
pleasure,
always
brother.
a joy. And thank you guys for listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project. We'll see you back next Wednesday evening, 11 p.m. Central Standard Time. Good night, everybody.
God bless all.